Hey everyone, Poindexter here, and today we'll be flying sorties 4 and 5 in Interceptor Ace Volume 2. In our last video, our pilot was shot down on the second sortie, but bailed out safely. The B-17 he was attacking was destroyed in the process. In the third sortie, our pilot was struck in the fuel tank by return fire from the B-17 he was attacking, causing a leak and forcing him to break off before any significant damage was done to the enemy bomber. Now, let's begin our fourth sortie. We begin by rolling for the raid's location, and we'll be intercepting over Brunswick in the Ruhr. We roll for the weather, and the weather is good. Staff Sergeant Kemp takes off, and we roll for possible fighter bomber attack. We roll a 2. No attack, but just barely. We proceed to the raid location and roll for an encounter. We roll an 8, and we engage the raid head-on. The raid is made up of B-17Gs with P-47 escorts. We'll go for the bombers first and attack from the starboard flank. We roll for the exact orientation and the altitude, since we're attacking from head-on. We roll a 1, so we'll be attacking from position 2, which is the front quarter. Another roll of 1 means we'll approach from level altitude. From this position and altitude, we remove 2 random hits from our attack at long range. Bomber return fire is reduced by 1 random hit, but with our pilot having the ACM ability, that increases to 2 less hits. Before we attack, we're going to implement a new mechanic introduced in Interceptor Ace Volume 2. As a staff sergeant, we have the scrounging ability, which is the same as in Volume 1. Volume 2 adds a second ability to this rank, Rot Leader. This ability allows you to order your wingman to attack first in a round. You may use both the scrounging and Rot Leader abilities on a sortie, but cannot use the same ability twice. The downside to using Rot Leader is that it immediately adds a fatigue point, so you must be careful not to overuse it, lest your pilot accumulate too much fatigue. We'll use the Rot Leader ability and increase our fatigue to 4. Our wingman begins his attack, and we roll a 5, which is reduced to 4 since our wingman has the gunnery ability. Normally, our wingman would have destroyed the bomber, but since we are using the Rot Leader ability, that is changed to 6 random airframe hits. But we remove 2 hits since the attack is from long range. 1 hit has no effect, but 2 engines are struck along with the airframe and a gunner. Our wingman was also damaged in the attack. Kemp begins his attack and will target the starboard wing and hopefully cause more damage to the engines. He lines up and fires, and causes group damage to the wing. The controls, wing, and outboard engine are hit, but the extra random hit, which is part of the group damage effect, does not apply, as we are attacking at long range, which removes 2 random hits. The bomber returns fire and scores no hits. Kemp moves to medium range. At this range, he will cause 1 less random hit. He targets the starboard wing and fires, and scores 4 hits. The inboard engine is destroyed, and the bomber takes another hit to the wing and the fuel tanks. But the hit to the fuel tank is a leak. The B-17 returns fire and only scores 1 hit, which strikes the landing gear. With 2 engines knocked out, the B-17 is out of formation, so we switch to the B-17 out of formation display and continue our attack. Kemp now has the bomber right where he wants him and moves to close range. The B-17 will automatically do one less random hit in this space due to being out of formation, and the gunner has been knocked out. Combined with Kempf's ACM ability, the bomber will suffer a -3 penalty in return fire. Our interceptor will also do one extra hit to the starboard engines, but since both engines are knocked out on this side, it will have no effect. Kempf will target the starboard wing once again in the hopes of either severing the wing or striking the fuel tanks. He fires and scores group damage. But it's not quite as devastating as we had hoped. Most of the hits are to the engines, which have already been knocked out, with another hit to the starboard wing and the controls. The B-17 returns fire and scores no hits. With this final attack, Kempf must now break off and deal with the P-47 escorts. As usual, we'll attempt to escape this encounter by rolling a 1 or 2. And we continue Kempf's good luck on yet another roll of 1, and Kempf manages to slip away once again. Although we still have ammo and have only taken one hit, we'll call it a day and head back to our airfield. With the landing gear damaged, we add +2 to the landing die roll. We roll a 3, which is modified to 5, and Kempf lands safely. Though we didn't destroy the bomber outright, we did cause significant damage. It is possible the bomber may crash on the way home. To determine this, we need to roll a 1 on a D10 dice roll. However, this number may be modified depending on how much damage we caused. For each engine knocked out, we apply a -1 modifier to the final die roll. Leaking fuel tanks adds another -1 modifier, along with any serious wounds or death to the pilot and co-pilot. Finally, any system that is 1 point short of destruction adds another -1 modifier. Looking at our battered B-17, we see that 2 engines have been knocked out, the fuel tanks are leaking, and the starboard wing is 1 point short of destruction. This adds up to a -4 modifier. We roll for the final result, and it's a 10. Subtracting 4 leaves 6, and despite the damage we inflicted, the sturdy B-17 makes it back to England. Kempf only took 1 hit, which is quickly repaired, and he is ready for the next sortie. For separating a bomber from the formation, Kempf is awarded 2 game points, which brings his score to 44, and we increase fatigue to 5. At this fatigue level, we'll have to add a +1 to all future parachute die rolls. We've reached the end of March 1944. Since we'll be starting a new month on our next sortie, we shuffle the combat cards, and we're ready to begin our next sortie. Our first mission of April 1944 will begin over Augsburg in Munich. Unfortunately, Munich is out of our range, so we'll have to sit this one out. The missed sortie does reduce our fatigue by 1 point, however, which is now 4, and removes the +1 parachute penalty for the moment. We continue to the next sortie, and this time it's Berlin, which is within range, but just barely. We roll for the weather, and the weather is good. We'll have 1 chance to contact the raid, but we'll also have to roll for fighter sweeps along the way. Kempf takes off, and we roll for a possible fighter bomber attack. It's a 1, and he has indeed been intercepted over his airfield. The fighter bombers are P-51Bs, and Kempf automatically starts at a disadvantage. We can attempt to avoid combat by rolling a 1 or 2, but in this case, we'll have to add a +1 modifier to the roll, simulating us being caught at low speed and altitude. We roll a 2, but the +1 makes 3, and this time, Kempf doesn't get away. The P-51B has a speed of 22, a firepower of 6, and is an agile aircraft. Our FW-190 has a speed of 20, a firepower of 19, and is not agile. We now roll to determine the Allied pilot quality on the early 1944 column. We roll 40, and this pilot is trained, which is the default quality. Kemp will use an advanced maneuver, the Cuban 8. This maneuver gains us one position and causes one less random hit from the enemy fighter. Advanced maneuvers can only be used once per sortie. Now we'll draw a card for the P-51. And potentially the P-51 scores 2 hits, but the Cuban 8 maneuver negates one of the hits, and Kemp's ACM ability negates another, so the P-51 scores no hits. Also, we gain one position on the P-51 and are now head-on. We've reached the end of the combat round, and now we roll for initiative before beginning the next round. However, we have several modifiers to consider before reaching the final total. For the P-51, we add a +2 modifier since it's an agile aircraft. For Staff Sergeant Kemp and his FW-190, we add +1 for the MW-50 engine boost, +1 for situational awareness, +1 for being an ace pilot, and a +1 for our wingman also being an ace. For the final die roll modifiers, we add +2 for the P-51 and +4 for our interceptor. The Allied escort rolls a 6, and our interceptor rolls a 4. Adding the modifiers, both aircraft tie on an 8, which means no change. We begin the second round of combat. Kemp will use his reflex skill to get in a first shot and hopefully cause enough damage to force the P-51 to break off or destroy it completely. Kemp fires at the P-51 and scores group damage. The controls and airframe are hit. The third hit has no effect, but the fourth strikes the pilot, causing a serious wound. Since the P-51 pilot has been seriously wounded, he cannot fire, but will instead go defensive until he is able to get away. We draw a combat card for the P-51 and read the defense section. The Mustang pulls a split S, avoiding one hit, which is ignored since we used the reflex skill, and the encounter ends. With no damage and plenty of ammo left, Kemp moves to the next endurance box, and we roll for a possible fighter sweep. It's a 5, and no sweep is encountered. We move to the Bremen sector and roll again. It's a 4, no sweep. We move to the Frankfurt sector and roll again. Another 4, and no sweep is encountered. We finally make it to the raid location, and we roll for contact. And roll a 12, a random event. We roll again on the random event chart. It's a 9, which is eyewitness corroboration of a kill. This is a useful event. The next bomber that crashes on its way back to England, we automatically get credit for the kill and will not have to roll a die for confirmation. Unfortunately, we have reached the end of our endurance and must land. And Kemp arrives safely back at base. We took no damage on this sortie and are ready to take to the air once again. Our pilot's fatigue level is raised to 5, and the +1 modifier to all parachute die rolls is in effect once again. And with that, we've reached the end of the video. Staff Sergeant Kemp scored no kills on these 2 sorties, but did manage to score a few points for knocking a bomber out of formation. In the second sortie, he was jumped by Allied fighter bombers while taking off, but his experience and flying skills offset what could have been, at worst, a career-ending event. Our FW-190's superior firepower, combined with reflexes, helped even the score when the P-51 pilot was seriously wounded in a hail of gunfire. Scoring no aerial victories may not garner prestige and glory, but as stated before, our pilot still lives to fight another day. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next sortie.